Are we good to go, Arunima? Should I get started? Thumbs up. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us today for this webinar where we are launching both the To Zero Vision and the Safe Futures Hub. We appreciate you being here. I do want to point out that we have interpretation in 3 languages, Spanish, Arabic, and French. So please go ahead, and you should have a little button at the bottom that's a globe, and you can click on interpretation and select one of those 3 languages. Spanish, Arabic, French. We want to get as many people as we can engaged in this exciting conversation. So my name is Daniela Ligero. I am the CEO of Together for Girls and a proud partner with both To Zero and the Safe Futures Hub. And I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, so we really appreciate you making the time to spend this hour with us. And really, we're here to talk about the issue of sexual violence against children. And we are living in a pivotal moment right now with the first ever global ministerial conference on ending violence against children happening last year in November, where we had over 110 member states come and make commitments around this issue, many of those focused on sexual violence against children or ending sexual violence against children. And we know from the first ever global prevalence numbers that were launched last year, Together for Girls, WHO, UNICEF, and so many other partners worked on these, where we know now that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 7 boys globally experience some form of sexual violence before the age of 18. So this isn't a fringe issue. It's not happening in some communities. It is happening in homes, in schools, in places of worship, in sports, in communities, in the context of child marriage, in the context of humanitarian settings, and more online. And so we are here to launch, again, these 2 initiatives. So once you understand the size and the magnitude of the problem, which we now do, after really decades of work from so many partners to understand how big this problem is, it's really important to think about, well, what are the evidence-based solutions, the scientifically backed solutions around policies, programs, interventions that can actually make a difference. And so that's where Safe Futures Hub comes in. This is a joint initiative by Together for Girls, by the We Protect Global Alliance, and by SVRI. And our focus is really to mobilize knowledge, include underrepresented perspectives, and bridge evidence gaps, particularly in low and middle income countries. And we are launching the Safe Futures evidence review today and the hub more broadly. So very exciting to have that and understanding what are the solutions that work to address this really challenging issue that is global in nature. And of course, To Zero is part of that plan around how do you respond, because this is a child-centered approach that is focused on a variety of different aspects of, how do you get to zero, as the name implies? How do we get from these huge numbers to a world where there is no sexual violence against children? And this amazing collaborative effort included over 330 global leaders from around the world that came together to develop a framework of how do we get there? What are the kinds of pathways to get to a world where we no longer have sexual violence against children, building on the evidence and the research that is highlighted in the Safe Futures Hub. So with that, I'm just very excited that you're all able to join us. It has been a labor of love over several years to get to this point. And I'm very excited to pass it over to my colleague, Sean, who's the executive director of To Zero and who will be talking more about this initiative. Thanks for your leadership, Sean, and great to have you here with us today.
Thanks very much, Daniela. Yeah, thank you for those warm words. And I should point out that for the To Zero initiative, Daniela was one of our champions, field leaders who helped advise and direct all of our work. So again, thank you to Daniela for all of that work, input, commitment, and passion around To Zero and this collective effort. And my job today really is just to introduce and launch the A Vision to Zero report, which is the culmination of all of this work that we've been doing over the last 18 months about building a vision to move towards an end of childhood sexual violence. So I might just share a couple of slides, if that's okay, as I'm talking, just to kind of center some of the conversation. So what we are doing today is launching A Vision to Zero, and this really is a roadmap to ending childhood sexual violence. Daniela talked about our colleagues in the Safe Futures Hub and the really excellent and hugely important evidence review that is also being launched today. What our job really was to do is not to think, to focus in on what we know works or where the evidence is, because we have our colleagues in the Safe Futures who are doing that work and doing that in a really powerful way. Our job was really to think about what does it take to end childhood sexual violence. So starting from where we are now, what's the pathway we need to go on in order to get to an end of CSV? And I think part of the kind of motivation behind that was an absolute belief and commitment that this is a preventable issue. One of the founding beliefs of To Zero is we do not accept this as an inevitability for the children of this world. And so our job and our work was to bring together a group of stakeholders and field leaders to start to work through what exactly that pathway looks like. So if we think about that, this is why we exist. This is why the To Zero initiative exists. And it exists so that we can have a world where children can grow up free from the threat of sexual violence. Now, we know, despite exceptional leaders working on this issue every single day, and despite the growing evidence bases we will see in the evidence review from the Safe Futures Hub, we know that this issue still continues to attract a sense of fatalism and taboo. And at times, our response as a field globally can be somewhat fragmented. But we believe that by coming together to build this shared vision, we will be more able to more effectively realize that vision. And really for the vision, we are thinking about a collective vision that can show how the sector can begin to address a couple of key issues, such as the lack of resourcing. And we want to make sure that the emphasis is placed on long-term work that really addresses the root causes of this issue. So that was the starting point of To Zero. And from there, as Daniela was saying, we started a deeply consultative process. So we have engaged directly with over 330 actors from across the sector, and that over an 18-month time period. So our conversations were deep, and we really wanted to explore some of the key drivers and causes of childhood sexual violence and some of the key solutions and pathways that can lead to an end of that. Our consultations included 12 in-person workshops, which you can see there on the graphic, were in many different locations around the world. And from that, we developed this roadmap and this vision. And what we found in these conversations, and our job was to synthesize and kind of bring together all of the different perspectives and inputs and experience that we had from all of the exceptional leaders who engaged in this process. We found that we started to coalesce around a number of critical themes. And these themes were informed by our survivor-centered approach. And our starting point really in developing these themes and starting to kind of distill these out of the conversation was a starting point that supports children, adolescents, and youth to develop a sense of agency and autonomy that they carry into adulthood. And that starting from that point where we wanted to see an end was a strong and sustained policy mechanisms being implemented and stringent regulation and oversight that keep public settings and private companies safe for children, including those settings in an online environment. And when we took that framework, we identified these 6 pathways and practical steps that we believe should be prioritized. And this just kind of highlights those overarching pathways or themes that as a field, we continue to focus on and build and gain momentum behind. We believe over time, and this is not a short-term fix, but over time, this will drive us towards an end to childhood sexual violence. And you can see that those themes are around shifting social norms, making digital spaces safe for children, ensuring political will exists. I think that's we know that without that, we will struggle to progress. Making sure that we're rooted in evidence. And again, I think our Safe Futures Hub colleagues very much speak to that particular theme. Accountability among institutions that deal with children. And we have a resourced and a united and connected sector. So all of that together helps drive us towards that ending to childhood sexual violence. Within that, what we also found during our consultations was that there was particular initiatives or particular areas of focus that, if pursued over the next 5 years, could lead to transformational change. These areas of focus were not an end in of themselves, but they helped accelerate us towards these longer term goals and ultimately towards an ending of CSV. And we termed these accelerators action accelerators, and those are also highlighted and contained in the report. And when generating those action accelerators, when thinking about what we were hearing from our conversations and what specific areas we could really focus on in, say, the next 5 years, we gave ourselves 4 criteria in terms of what people were telling us. The first criteria in terms of identifying accelerators through our conversations was whether any of these particular ideas or particular approaches had transformative potential, so they could really move the dial on a particular aspect of this issue. The second criteria was that this was a clear and compelling moment of opportunity, so the time was right to really focus on these particular opportunities. The third was that there was a group of actors ready and able to grasp the opportunity, so we had people to kind of take up that opportunity and move forward with it. And the fourth criteria was that there was significant progress possible within 5 years. So we have these long-term pathways to ending CSV, and then we have these 8 examples of action accelerators that can help us accelerate our progress towards those longer-term goals in the next 5 years. And all of these were generated from the conversation. So these aren't to Zero's views or thoughts or insights. These are our stakeholders, our 330 stakeholders, and what they brought into the conversation. So you can see them that, that of those 8, pressure and incentivize institutions to protect children, support justice systems that center children and survivors in their work, strengthen the evidence base. Although we have a very strong evidence base, we know that there are still evidence gaps. And our research colleagues will tell us that with greater support and funding, we can have better and stronger evidence that leads to better and more effective responses. Galvanize political activism, reshape the funding landscape. This came across very strongly in terms of having a properly resourced sector. Enhance strategies around peer-on-peer abuse and other problematic sexual behavior amongst children. Pressure and incentivize the tech industry in particular, given the critical role that they play, and transform the narrative. Again, another strong point that came out in our conversations, where we need to move from a narrative around this issue of fatalism and despair to one of hope and agency and ability to really effectively address these root causes. So within the 2.0 report that we're launching today, we both detail and do a deep dive into those long-term critical themes and also into these action accelerators. What I would say about the action accelerators is that they are examples of things that can accelerate and progress this field over the next 5 years. They are not exclusive. They are simply a reflection of what we heard. And we would be encouraging all of our colleagues within the field to think of other action accelerators that could be added to this list that could, again, support us in our overall goal of eliminating childhood sexual violence. All of this will be contained in the 2.0 report, which is now available for download and for viewing on our website. And I would like to kind of just finish in terms of kind of introducing the report by saying that there's two other things that we want to do. The first is that we know within the report, as well as all of these actions, what we need in order to effectively address this issue is to strengthen the field. And that without these type of interventions, we will not be successful in addressing CSV. And in strengthening the field, we are specifically talking about investing in capacity and leadership. We have exceptional leaders working in this field. We have seen them, we have interacted with them, we have shared some of their journey with them. But we know that this is an issue that is difficult, triggering, and challenging. And we know that our leaders cannot act without support and without investment in the long term. So we need to be investing in that capacity with our leaders. We need to strengthen the field's infrastructure. We need to focus on root causes, and we need to start to shift the narrative, as I said, around campaigning, around the landscape and how we talk about this issue. Ultimately, what we want to do in this report is have a call to action. This report is not a solution-focused, our evidence review. That, as I say, is our Safe Futures colleagues. But this report does build on all of the evidence we have and point to a pathway, to a future and a direction of travel. And it is explicit and specific around what we need to do in terms of that direction of travel in order to end childhood sexual violence. We know that this journey is something that we can't do alone. We know that this report in and of itself won't change the landscape. So we are calling in this report, given all of the insight that we have been able to distill into the report, we are calling for a commitment from governments, public and private institutions, including the tech sector, and engagement of private donors and the media to start to really focus on this issue, to start talking about this narrative of hope, and to start to resource and support all of our collective efforts. We are going to continue to play our part as 2.0 by continuing to engage with the field, building up some of that infrastructure through the building of relationships across the field, and starting to think about how we develop this more positive, this more powerful narrative of hope and of a journey that ends childhood sexual violence. I would encourage all of you to go and read this report. It's available now on our website. The link is there. I will also post it into the chat of this meeting. And there is a QR code there that you can use to download a report or view it online. We'll also be bringing our community of stakeholders together later on in this year to review progress on the 2.0 report and on this issue overall. We are issuing an open invitation now to anyone on this call to join us at that gathering. So if you would be interested in the autumn to come together to think about that long-term journey to end childhood sexual violence, please just register your name and your details, and we'll be in contact later this year. And again, the URL, the link and the QR code is there if you would like to do that. And I will just end by saying this is an extremely exciting and powerful moment, I think, for 2.0, but I would hope for our field as well. I genuinely believe that this is our moment. We are at the cusp of something that sets out a journey towards ending what we are all currently working on day in, day out. And we know that together, and it is really part of 2.0's role to bring all of our collective voices together into one powerful statement that together we can make our world a safer and more joyful place for children. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. You're getting lots of hearts. I hope you could see that in claps. Amazing. And thank you for your leadership on this. Really outstanding. Yes. Now I'm going to turn over to Nicholas Markashvili, who is our director of the Safe Futures Hub, to talk a little bit about Safe Futures Hub.
Thank you, Daniela and Sean, and hi, everyone. I'm Nicholas. I'm the director of Safe Futures Hub, as Daniela mentioned. And thank you so much for joining us today. I don't have a lot of time, but today I'll be unpacking some key high-level findings from our evidence review titled Building Safe Futures, Solutions to End Childhood Sexual Violence, which actually ties in very nicely, as Sean mentioned, with the roadmap and all the work that 2.0 is doing. But before I dive in, just a few words about the Safe Futures Hub. If you're not familiar, we are a global initiative that's co-led by SVRI, Together for Girls, and the We Protect Global Alliance. So we are 3 agencies strong. And our mission is very ambitious, yet simple. It's really to redefine, build, and mobilize knowledge to end childhood sexual violence. And we focus squarely on solutions that work to prevent CSV and also trying very hard to uplift diverse, practice-based, research-driven, and survivor-informed knowledge. The heart of our mission to mobilize knowledge is this evidence review, which you'll be hearing about shortly, in which we really try to ensure that the latest evidence from low and middle income countries, is accessible, practical, and ready to drive change. But note that this is one of many upcoming initiatives under this pillar. So if you sign up for our newsletter on the Safe Futures Hub website, we'll make sure to keep you posted on all the progress. Just a quick recap on the background of the report. So this review builds on the 2019 What Works to Prevent Sexual Violence Against Children report, which was undertaken by Together for Girls. And the process of creating this included input from over 40 advisor group members and key informants, really from the inception to the finalization phase. We received over 750 plus comments, inputs, and very specific resources from various stakeholders, which we actually incorporated in the final product. And again, just ensuring that the methodology and the findings reflect, diverse experiences and insights from the field. But the question that we get a lot is why focus on LMICs? And this is very much in line with our mission to be fully stakeholder driven in everything that we do. And this focus emerged very strongly from in our kind of conversations with stakeholders, where there was a clear gap that was highlighted. In fact, everyone in our network, and it was a very globally representative and diverse network, was genuinely surprised by the number of studies and really the wealth of knowledge and evidence that came out of LMICs. But I also should mention that our upcoming work, especially in 2025, will also highlight evidence coming out of high-income countries and ultimately lead to a more kind of comprehensive global understanding of what the evidence base looks like around prevention. Our approach to this review, you can read the full methodology in the report, but it was very systematic and rigorous. We focused on sourcing relevant literature from diverse contexts, applying criteria for inclusion, and then we categorized evidence using the INSPIRE framework, grouping programs into intervention types, classified their effectiveness based on robust evaluation methods. And as I said, if you want to learn more about the methodology, please read the full report, and it's in the appendix. Now, for those of you who don't know about the INSPIRE framework, just to put it very plainly, since I don't have a lot of time, it outlines 7 evidence-based strategies designed to prevent and respond to all forms of violence against children globally. And we'll put a link to the technical package in the chat as well. And it's a fantastic organizing framework for the child protection sector, and it's something I'm sure you all use in your work. And here you can see the distribution of studies along the lines of INSPIRE, total of 72 studies that met our criteria out of more than 1,000 that were screened. And also this really helps us identify where evidence is strongest and where gaps remain, and can actually help guide future research priorities and program investments as well. And it's also not surprising that education and life skills and parenting and caregiver support interventions are so popular because they are much needed interventions, and but there was a lot that we could work with under these 2 kind of specific strategies. Our review covered a wide range of countries as highlighted on this map. And I think this global perspective allows us to really draw the lessons from diverse settings, again, ensuring the applicability of our findings across different cultural and socioeconomic contexts. Now, let's kind of dive into the findings. Now, if you look at the effective intervention types that came up in the review, and when I say effective intervention types, meaning they were supported by a number of high quality studies showing evidence of impact. So everything from adolescent development clubs to building parent skills and recognizing signs of and preventing CSV, cash transfer programs, education modules that were embedded in school curriculum, self-defense interventions, and educator training and curriculum design. Following that, the promising interventions, on the other hand, show positive outcomes, but may need more evidence to confirm their full effectiveness, especially across diverse settings. And these programs also often address emerging issues or are implemented in challenging environments where rigorous evaluation is still underway. And this came up as, small group interventions for children outside of schools, parent counseling, child and adolescent friendly response and support services. And then prudent interventions, however, are based on strong theoretical frameworks or have been recommended in global treaties, but they lack extensive empirical validation. And what I mean by that is that their impact is extremely difficult to measure. Like, for example, understanding the true impact of a domestic legislature on tech facilitated CSV is very challenging and incredibly hard to measure. But we know that it makes sense. So they are a part of a comprehensive prevention strategy while more evidence is being generated. There are also some interventions that have conflicting evidence showing effectiveness in certain contexts, but not in others. Again, this just kind of highlights the importance of context-specific implementation and just the need for continuous M&E to really adapt interventions as needed. So child-friendly spaces in humanitarian settings, school-based interventions to prevent problematic sexual behavior among children and adolescents were among some of those conflicting interventions. And then there are also intervention types where evidence is still emerging. So media and tech-assisted interventions, sports-based interventions, safeguarding systems and child servicing organizations, savings programs, and recognizing, screening, reporting, and disclosure of CSV are again among those that where more evidence is needed. On the next kind of two slides, I'll just give example of two strategies. If we did the full review, it would take us a full day. Maybe that could not even be enough. So I encourage you to read the full report and find sections that are most relevant to your work. So we know that supporting parents and caregivers is critical. For example, the Parent app in Tanzania, one of many programs highlighted in the review, was designed to prevent abuse of adolescents. It engaged 4,800 caregiver adolescent pairs that participated in sexual violence enhanced version of the Parenting for Lifelong Health program, with in-person sessions, an offline app, and the WhatsApp support groups. And the results showed that adolescents whose families use the Parent app demonstrated increased adolescent and caregiver gender equitable norms and behaviors, and also reduced rates of past months childhood sexual violence. Again, I'm just highlighting some quick findings, but you can read the details in the report. We also know that schools play a dual role, right? So they are a protective environment and also potential sites of harm. And the Deaf Kids Defenders Program, a games-based safeguarding intervention for deaf children, was piloted across 10 schools in Pakistan and South Africa. And the pilot intervention included, training for teachers and other session leaders, offline facilitated sessions, and also some online activities. And the impact that it showed is that it improved children's knowledge of safety measures and highlighted the importance of tailored, inclusive education approaches. Over 90% of children demonstrated increased knowledge and application of safety messages after the intervention. Now, just to emphasize, the main point of this report, and as Daniela and Sean have mentioned, is that we know enough to act now, right? So we have enough evidence to invest more and take decisive action. However, this will not come as a shock to you, but despite progress, there are significant challenges that remain. I think multi-sectoral coordination often lacks clarity, especially across health, justice, and education sectors. M&E gaps, resource limitations, and societal barriers like stigma and harmful norms still persist. And I feel like addressing this head on really requires a more integrated effort, very robust data systems, and inclusive approaches that reach all children, especially those that are most at risk. And I also want to say a huge thank you to 23 endorsing organizations that have worked with us, endorsed the review. They really represent a diverse range of voices from academia to local NGOs, INGOs, survivor-led advocacy groups. And of course, a special thank you to the Oak Foundation for really being a strong ally, providing vital funding for this work, but also many other initiatives in our field. So again, thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and please do read the full report. So back to you, Daniela.
Amazing, Nicholas. Amazing work leading all this and the report, but also presenting in the allotted time. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I did forget to say at the beginning, but I know some of you have been doing this in the chat already, which is please identify yourself with whatever information you feel comfortable sharing. If you're with an organization where you're calling in from, I'm looking at the chat and seeing so many uh, friends and colleagues from around the world. It's really fantastic. So please go ahead in the chat and introduce yourself so we know who you are and where you're calling in from. And with that, I'm really excited now to open it up for our panel. So we have a phenomenal panel here today to talk a little bit more about this work. I'm not going to go into their full bios. I'm going to ask instead, I think we're going to put them in the chat. Um, but we have Dr. Elizabeth Letourneau from Moore, which is preventing sexual abuse at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Used to be a different name. Now it's just Moore. I'm getting used to saying that, Elizabeth. Ian Drennan, who's the executive director of the We Protect Global Alliance, and of course, a partner in Safe Futures Hub. And Sophia Liu, who is founder of Secrets Worth Sharing. And we were really excited to also have her be part of the VAC Ministerial Global Survivor Council last year and got to know her really well. So welcome. I'm so glad to have you with us today. So I think what I'll do is I'll turn to each one of you and ask you to cover, first of all, kind of your organization and anything you want to say about your organization and what its role is in addressing childhood sexual violence and how it relates to Zero or Building Safe Futures Hub. I'll ask you to do a quick run of those, and then I'll get into some meatier questions for each of you. So Elizabeth, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Daniela, and hi, everybody. I'm really enjoying seeing so many names that I recognize in the chat. So as Daniela mentioned, I direct Moore, which is at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And at Moore, we one of the things that we do is we lead the development, evaluation, adaptation, and dissemination of prevention solutions that work, including solutions designed to prevent harm from occurring in the first place. One of our areas is focusing on preventing the onset of problem sexual behavior among adolescents and young people. And that is a key strategy and a key need identified by A Vision to Zero and Building Safe Futures.
Fantastic. Ian, why don't we go over to you?
No problem. So Ian Drennan, as you said, Executive Director of We Protect Global Alliance. So we are the largest and most diverse network dedicated to ending child sexual abuse in the digital space. So we bring together governments, civil society, intergovernmental organizations, and the private sector to try and convene experts and develop solutions. So we're very proud to be a core partner of Safe Futures Hub and also to have been part of the design process for 2.0.
Thanks, Ian. Sophia?
Thank you. Hello, I'm Sophia. I was on the Global Ministerial. I'm also a trauma-informed designer and founder of Secrets Worth Sharing, which is a UK nonprofit that focuses on how we can use design thinking, trauma-informed methodology that I call serious joy, and popular culture to encourage the public and organisations to talk about childhood sexual abuse. And the main things that we do within the Action Accelerators is to transform the narrative around childhood sexual abuse in the public with film clubs and digital resources, but then also to pressure and incentivize organizations by doing the trauma-informed step-by-step design thinking around how they can redesign their support services for survivors.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you.
All right, as you can see, we have a phenomenal panel here. So I'm going to start with you, Elizabeth, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how evidence-based prevention strategies like the ones outlined in the Safe Futures report can be scaled, including in diverse socioeconomic settings. I know, this particular evidence review was focused on LMICs or low and middle income countries, as Nicholas pointed. but there's so much that's also happening within different settings within countries that are high income countries. So just want to hear more about how you see this work and the biggest challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, thanks. It is a super exciting time to be in this space, to be doing research on prevention solutions. There's never really been a moment like, I would say, starting the last 5 years. There's so much going on. So the opportunity right now is that from where I'm sitting, we've got really well-validated evidence-based programs, programs that have been supported through randomized controlled trial evaluations that work to prevent harm from occurring in the first place, perpetration prevention programs. So we've got several that have already been well validated, and there are at least, I think, about 20 ongoing trials right now. We're leading several of those at Moore, but there's many going on elsewhere that are evaluating other prevention programs and that are soon going to shed even more light on what works and what needs to work, what needs help when it comes to perpetration prevention. And again, to be clear, perpetration prevention is one slice of prevention, but it's an area where we think there's a lot of promise. Primary prevention programs have been shown to prevent sexual violence and sexual harassment by teens against other teens and younger children. So school-based curricula, there are online interventions that provide an effective treatment programs to adults at risk of exploitation and abuse. There's self-help programs that are proving to be effective. So it's really remarkable. So, as Sean mentioned, we have real pathways. There's real solutions towards ending CSV. There are, of course, also real challenges. And one challenge in this particular space around perpetration prevention is that all of the evidence-based interventions so far have been developed, tested, and deployed in high-income countries. So we really need to be thinking about developing programs in lower resourced settings and also adapting what's already out there to see if they can work in other settings. And we are working with Safe Futures Hub, with Child Helpline International, some other partners, Lucy Faithfull Foundation, Stop and Now, and Karolinska Institute, to propose one method for really getting solutions out from the global north into the broader world, and that is to partner with existing child helplines. Helplines already exist in most countries, and they are typically focused on children at risk of victimization, but they all handle kids calling in with concerns about their own sexual thoughts, feelings, and behaviors because those kids and young people have nowhere else to go. So taking advantage of that infrastructure, of the talent that is already there, folks who are knowledgeable about child sexual victimization, knowledgeable about teens and adolescents and young people, and who are already dealing with potential perpetration issues informally, and working to develop a system that brings in the evidence-based strategies that we know work with teens and young people, and getting those into these existing helplines, I think has a lot of promise for quickly expanding the work that's been done in the global north to include the global south. And of course, this has to include close collaboration with the experts in countries. So it's not imposing one idea on another country, but really adapting and developing solutions that work in different areas.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And that is so encouraging. And I think especially this idea of building on these platforms that already exist instead of recreating the wheel is just really, I think, the kind of thinking that's needed, especially in resource constrained settings. So that's really amazing. Thank you for your leadership there. Sophia, I'm going to turn over to you. And you've done such amazing work around breaking the silence, shifting harmful norms. I love that you center joy in the work that you do. That's so important. So just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about kind of your work, but also, the fact that 2.0 really, and Sean brought this up previously, really talks about the need to transform the stories we tell ourselves, these societal narratives around childhood sexual violence, and thinking through how, survivor-led or centered work can really help kind of shake things up and challenge the stigma that exists around some of these issues. So would love to hear more from you about that.
Of course, and thank you. When I saw, because we were all sent these questions in advance to prep, and when I saw this question come up, I was so happy because I feel like a lot of this is the crux of where we lie when we talk about changing the narrative, right? Like, yes, of course, I'm a CSV survivor. I'm really open about it, but I'm also a Cambridge graduate. I worked at McKinsey Design. I founded an organization in my own right. And I'm saying all those things shamelessly because I am looking for some employed work at the moment, but also because I feel that above everything, even in the child sexual abuse sector, it feels easier to lead with a different type of expertise. It feels easier to be taken seriously if you say, I'm a child psychologist or I'm a data scientist or blah, 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 so that being a survivor is not your only tagline. And I think we know, based on the stats that you shared, Daniela, from the outskirts of this report, and we're doing the maths when we look at the 186 people in this room, you know, you don't come into this sector for the money. You do it because you love it and you're personally affected by it, right? Or you know someone who is. And you know, I'm very sure there's a lot of people who don't disclose their personal experience for very, very valid reasons. And if that is the sector that we're in on ending child sex abuse, how can we expect other sectors to also then come on board? So I think when we talk about survivor narratives, it's more about how do we recognize that alongside being a survivor, we have so many other identities that are part of us. And this is part of my joyful methodology. And how do we blend them together in a way that makes it more approachable for people outside of this room? You know, like I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a data scientist, I am a designer. And I think that brings a different approach of looking at this in a creative or pop culture way. And you know, that way might be resonating more with fathers and sons who might not attend a panel like this, but who would go to a film club and critique the scenes of CSV in movies with me and a therapist, you know. So when we do that, we create more ways to end the stigma by bringing these conversations outside of this room, which is what I said at the launch of the report in Colombia as well.
Thank you, Sophia. And as a public survivor of childhood sexual violence myself, I really appreciate you bringing that in. And I think it is so important to think about the labels, the stigma, the ways in which we categorize people. And yeah, just to acknowledge that there are several individuals who choose to be public about their experience, and there are many who don't, and others who don't have personal experience, and everyone's contributions are important and valid. And how do we start to shift some of those narratives, to move the stigma and the shame. And there's a shameless plug for the Brave movement, where we're trying to do some of that with a lot of public survivors who are out there and who have so much expertise, experience, leadership, who are helping to also shake things up on that front. Ian, I'm going to move over to you. And again, it's been such a pleasure to work with you. Gosh, it's been a while now. For the last decade, I think, on so many other projects and pieces of work in this sector, and excited that we get to do Safe Futures Hub together. And you've done so much to tackle online facilitated sexual violence, and both government and tech sector accountability. And, you know, 2.0, as Sean mentioned, really emphasize the issue of safe digital spaces. As we know, more and more children are online, and the numbers are pretty staggering in terms of bad things that are happening to children as a result. So, you know, can you talk a little bit about how can we incentivize tech industries to prioritize safety, to have these spaces be spaces of transformation and joy, to Sophia's work, but also how do we make them safe spaces, including in low and middle income countries? Over to you, Ian.
Oh, many thanks, Danielle. And I think incentivize is the right word. How do we make doing the right thing and taking accountability and taking responsibility for this incredibly important global issue? How do we get it to the point that we have, say, with cars, where safety is part of the marketing? You know, how, you know, it's one of the things you're checking out when you're making a decision. And I think we've seen a transformation in that approach during the time that I've been working on this issue, from I think the first thinking about how to engage through to actual legislation coming down the track, and now we're seeing it in a number of countries, and how that's being implemented and how that's being delivered. And I think there's a really important piece around prevention. So Elizabeth talked incredibly eloquently about primary prevention and trying, kind of engaging with potential offenders and that deterrence of offenders. That's critical work. I think another form of prevention is designing prevention in from the ground floor. That is what we would love to see, is that child safety is just one of those issues that are routinely considered and engaged with in a really serious way, in exactly the same way as when you put a really exciting, cool product to market, you look at, is it legally compliant? Is it vulnerable to viruses? Is it safe for children to use? If you think that children are going to access it. And that's so much more efficient and effective than trying to retrofit that onto the back end and trying to respond to problems as they arise. So we're trying to get that mindset in place. I think that's all there. Another thing that we try to do with our own network is to try and create spaces where we can have a dialogue about our challenges together, and to try and get to a space where we can be as transparent as possible in terms of talking about those challenges and learning from them, and trying to improve and build on that. And there's a lot of different ways in which we collaborate to do that. But I think there's a final point that I'd like to make, and maybe that feeds into both Brave and to Zero, and to what Sophia was saying, in that, users have a voice, survivors have a voice. And I think that, again, if I'm looking at the changes that I've seen since I've been involved in working in this space, that voice has got a lot louder. And there's a lot more ways. It's not perfect. But I think survivor advocacy, and also advocacy from children and young people themselves about how do they want to see the internet. I mean, I saw Alejandro from Red Papath, who's on the chat. I had the pleasure of going around with him and his team with schools in Bogota when I was in Colombia, and being able to hear from children about, this is the kind of internet we'd like to see. This is the kind of digital space that we like to see. And they don't see any sort of fixed barrier or boundary between the real world and the digital world. They're engaging with it as the world in which they're operating in. So it's why it's so important that I think the digital elements are integrated into how we approach childhood sexual violence, and that we're not perpetuating these silos, and that we're really taking a child-centered view of the world. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Ian. So we're going to try to get a few questions from the chat for the panelists before we have to go. We're going to try to keep to time as well. So I'm going to read two of the questions, and then I'll ask, because we have a few here, I'll ask panelists to pick which ones they want to respond to. So pay attention. So the first question is, beyond learning about what works to prevent sexual violence against children, it would be helpful to know from the panelists if they are seeing accelerated adoption and scale up of proven interventions, especially in low resource settings. Then also, thank you for your insights. I wanted your opinions on focusing the response on perpetrators, exploring the reasons and motivating factors, and to address this in order to prevent future perpetration. I lied. There are three questions I'm going to read just for time. And the final one, and again, you can pick any of these. What constraints and/or opportunities exist for preventing childhood sexual violence, given the financial and political challenges in the U.S., including issues related to gender-based violence? So I'm going to stop there. I see other questions coming in, but I'll stop there and give the opportunity for panelists to jump in and respond to any of these.
Could I? I'll take the last one first, and then I'll leave some of those. I mean, I think it's never been more important to focus on prevention. I think particularly, I was just in Davos at the end of last month at the World Economic Forum, and a lot of the conversations were about reducing a regulation and freeing up innovation and making things happen quicker and faster. And I think what we need to say to that is that yes, innovation is a good thing. Yes. However, we need to prioritize the most vulnerable children as one of the most vulnerable groups in our society. A group that, there's endless international law and conventions stating that they need an enhanced level of protection. This is one of the few issues where we do have bipartisan support in a very, very divided world. Yes, people are coming at it from different perspectives and from different ends, but there is a consensus that we can build on. But I think standing up for children's rights as a kind of baseline standard that we need as a human race, I think is something that's worth fighting for. So that's my response to that.
Well said, Ian. All right. Sophia and Elizabeth, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Thanks, Sophia. Thanks. Yeah, in terms of thinking about how we address perpetration, I put some responses into the question, the Q&A section. But I want to kind of elevate, again, and Ian has been talking about this, we've all been talking about this, that there are risk factors at the individual level. So we know that somebody with a sexual attraction to children, has a risk factor for acting on that. It doesn't mean that that person will act on it, and many people don't, but it is a risk factor. And we want solutions, and now we have solutions that can really help individuals with sexual attraction to children stay safe, keep themselves safe, keep children safe. We also know there's other risk factors that are completely unrelated to that. Kids are at risk for problem sexual behavior because they're young and dumb. They don't know, they're just learning how to navigate relationships. They're just learning how to navigate sexuality. They don't understand consent. They may not understand norms around who's an appropriately aged partner, and so on. That's another area that's pretty easy to address, and there's now multiple programs that do so. But there's also factors well beyond the individual level, and if we can address those, we're going to get a bigger bang for our buck. So Ian talked about making online spaces safe for children from the outset. We could reduce so much harm if we did that. Relying on treating an individual is a slow process, and you're not going to move the needle if that's where we stay. We've got to look at family level factors, societal level factors, whole of society, big tech factors, to find levers where we can really prevent at scale. And these are absolutely possible. We see these in other areas. I don't know that I have time to give an example of that, but we know that there are some kind of whole society level risk factors that if we started improving those, we would see sometimes ancillary effects, sometimes intended effects on the reduction of childhood sexual violence.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And I appreciate, Nicholas, you putting the questions again. I know that was a lot to take in in the chat. Sophia, over to you for some last thoughts.
I'm so glad that Ian and Elizabeth answered questions 2 and 3, because now I can answer question 1, which is about scaling interventions in low resource settings. I think we can all agree here that 1, this is a super taboo topic, and 2, comparatively such little resources are given to this topic. But 3, I have seen some of the most creative thinking in the most low resource environments. We saw it with the abolition movement, for example, right? And I think a lot of that reminds us that it doesn't have to be just us alone in this room that are doing this fight, right? I loved learning the word from our colleague Sebastian in Colombia about la lucha, right? Like we're always doing this form of fight. And, you know, that fight can be practiced in so many different appropriate ways by adjacent organizations or allies or different people. And, you know, for example, I was working on a trauma-informed methodology with the ICO in the UK, who are the independent body that you report data breaches to. Now, they aren't specifically dealing with childhood sexual abuse, but they are dealing with a lot of data breaches that are adjacent to childhood sexual abuse. So how can you use the resources you have to upskill other people on how to research and respond to these things in a trauma-informed way, using childhood sexual abuse as a case study? And by doing that, you're able to Trojan horse the issue and bring it in, because they brought me in to talk about domestic abuse and HIV. And then by the end, they also had a set of values to talk about childhood sexual abuse as well. And I will put it in the chat because I know we've only got 5 minutes, but there's a brilliant organization, Global South organization actually, called CHEN, that was started by a Pakistani founder. And they have a set of trauma-informed methodologies that they wrote up in a white paper that you can use to train other organizations. So don't work smart. Do work smart. Don't work hard, work smart. And, you know, it doesn't just have to be us solving this issue, because then it will never get solved. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And Elizabeth, we know you're at an airport. I want to thank you. I want to thank, because I know you have to go, Ian and Sophia, for being here with us, as well as everyone else on this call. Thank you for your leadership, for your focus. And I think at this moment, when there's so much noise, I really want to double down on what you said, Ian, around really important to stick to our values, to the messaging, and to the importance of centering the rights of children, the safety of children. That is something we can all agree on. So I want to, yeah.
Sorry, just before you're closing off, and just to add to the thanks, just important point as people look at the 2.0 report. I just want to acknowledge and appreciate the support of Oak Foundation, the Indigo Trust, Phillips Foundation, and Ignite Philanthropy, because none of this on the 2.0 side would have been possible with them. So just to note that as well. Thanks.
100%. Thank you to all of the funders that make this work possible. We are so grateful. So to close out, I'm not going to try to summarize what was said. We heard from Sean, from Nicholas, from the panel. There's so much here. I do want to remind you of what several of the panelists have said. At the end of the day, ending childhood sexual violence is achievable. We can do this, but it really is around aligning efforts. It's around political will and commitment and investments in what we know works, and following the pathway that's been set up for us with this 2.0 launch. If you're, a policymaker or a practitioner, we encourage you to leverage these findings to build, from the Safe Futures Hub and 2.0 to inform the strategies, the policies, the way forward. For advocates, we hope you can use the information in both of these reports to really push for additional investments in scale and prevention, healing, and justice to end childhood sexual violence. And for all of you participants in this webinar, we hope you'll engage with the reports. They're in the chat. We'll send them out again. Take a look, read through them, reach out. Sean has identified ways of engaging. You can also sign up for newsletters and really be part of this broader movement that these initiatives are a part of, which is to end childhood sexual violence in our lifetime. So thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for the amazing team that helped put together this webinar, both SVRI, We Protect Global Alliance, and Together for Girls, for all their work to get us here. We are just so fortunate to have this amazing community doing this amazing work. So be well, take good care of yourselves, radical self-care, people. It's the moment to be clear-eyed and to continue as la lucha continúa and the fight continues. Thank you so much.